Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday, and it has cooled down a little bit, like 10 degrees, which is kind of cool in Phoenix.
It's a little overcast. Yeah,
Yeah, a little
it
overcast.
is. Which is nice. It does help. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to get us all shared on all of our pages here. Oh, and hey, guess what, everybody? I figured out how to turn on the comments so that I could see them in real time.
And we can answer questions.
Facebook doesn't tell you that, they just go ahead and turn them off. So, all right. So yes, so viewers, if anyone has questions, we're going to be tracking those today. And we're going to be talking about, let's see. Okay, cool. All right, I got us up everywhere. Today, we are going to be talking about why we feel that brand new wholesalers should not work foreclosure leads. I know this is a controversial opinion maybe, and I have a feeling that it might be unpopular too. But I feel strongly about it. And we'll discuss why.
Yeah.
So Angie and I, when we began, actually both came in immediately working foreclosure leads. However, even though we were brand new, we had direct mentors. That's how we got the foreclosure leads.
Yes.
So we didn't just go get like a list willy-nilly and be all unorganized and crazy, which is what a lot of people do. So yeah, we started out immediately working foreclosures, and the reason that it was safe for us to do so is because we had a couple of experienced people on our team, with regard to our mentors, who were able to guide us so that we didn't make mistakes, we didn't make promises we couldn't keep, and we didn't do things that cause liability, because those are all issues when you're working foreclosures.
Yes. Absolutely. It's just, you can get yourself into trouble really, really fast. And the fact, federal offense too, in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that I don't know if people are aware of is, so real estate laws in general, and then things like foreclosure laws specifically, they vary widely from state to state. So, working foreclosure leads in our market here in Phoenix could be entirely different from a legal standpoint than working foreclosures in a place like, say, New York. And in fact, there are lots of Midwest, Southern, and East Coast states that require an attorney to do title work and closing. Here, where there's just a title company, that their sole purpose is to do all of the escrow and title business. And that alone is, they're completely different processes. So, a lot of what we discuss here on how to deal really has to do specifically with our market. But I know that there are people that are interested in what's called virtual wholesaling, and that could be in any market across the country because you're doing it online.
Yeah.
And, there are also people who might, look, Arizona has a lot of what we call transplants, right? So a lot of people who live in Arizona aren't from Arizona. And so there's lots of people here that might be thinking, well, I can do some business here, and then I can also be doing business maybe in the state where I moved from, or my home state, or whatever the case may be. And so something really important to know before you start making those determinations in your business is, what are those laws? What can I do? And do I have to run my business differently from one area to another? Arizona has really aggressive foreclosure laws. We don't have, for banks, what is called judicial foreclosure. Here, it is written into mortgages that essentially if you stop paying, the bank already has been given permission by your signature that they can take the property back. So they don't have to like open a lawsuit or do any of the things that in other states are required. And it's quick, 90 days. So, and the guidelines for foreclosure also vary from state to state. Now, there are certain states that require you to miss exactly a certain number of payments or for a certain amount of time. And federally speaking, there isn't a law that says every single state has to abide by the same thing. There's a guideline. And so that guideline is roughly 3 to 6 missed payments before legally a bank can say this is like a chronic issue and we can go ahead and foreclose.
And start foreclosure, yeah.
Yeah.
I heard, and I don't know if you agree with this, now that we've been in the business for a little while, but one of our other close mentors, friend, Courtney Jones, she had suggested, in the beginning, she thinks that if you're going to work in another state, you should have a real estate attorney in that other state in your pocket, your tool belt. Just because, as Lisa was saying, we don't know the intricacies of what a foreclosure looks like in the state of Pennsylvania, which is, let me just tell you, it's not easy. So, and all of the East Coast, the Midwest, some of the southern states, they're very different. California is different. Texas is notoriously kind of mean and fast. So, it's just everybody's a little bit different. But having a real estate attorney, and I think if you start this endeavor into real estate investing, I think having a real estate attorney, period, is a really good idea.
Absolutely. Yes. We could probably speak on this topic for an entire episode, but there's definitely, I know we talked in our last episode about the fact that we started with really no capital. And again, one of the things that made us really lucky is we were able to start with no capital because we had mentors that already had an established business with LLCs in place, and they had those resources. They had an attorney on retainer. They had a lot of resources that we grew into having as well, but that would have been maybe prohibitively expensive for us in the beginning.
Right.
And if you're going to start off, doing lone wolf activities, it's something to consider because you got to protect yourself. And that's one of the reasons we're talking about the topic today, is self-protection. Because what we see, that was Amazon at my door, if you all heard that.
I was like, who's listening?
At least the dogs didn't lose their minds.
Oh, that's funny.
What we see pretty frequently is, people get really excited about getting into this business. They get excited about wholesaling because they've been told that wholesaling's fast. You can make a lot of money and you can make it relatively quickly. And we're all taught that the best way to make money as a real estate investor, buying direct from the seller, is to find distress so that it's a win-win. Because, right, we've talked about this before, we need to find a seller that's motivated. Because if you have all the time in the world to sell your property, you can just leave it on the market and sit on it forever until you get what you want for it. And there's motivation there. So that doesn't really work for our business model. However, one of the issues is that when new wholesalers are looking at what are my options to find motivated sellers, obviously here in Arizona, where foreclosure happens quickly, that's one of the most motivated sellers you're going to find, right?
Yeah.
So given that fact, I think that people want to jump in immediately and they go, well, those are the most motivated sellers. Those are the sellers I need to work with. And yes, they are likely some of the most motivated sellers, and also some of the more complicated sellers, and potentially some of the more difficult problem solving. And because it's time sensitive, you are now on the hook if you're working with these sellers. So we want to discuss what it looks like to get into that and what your obligations are and what your potential liabilities are as a wholesaler working foreclosure.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, because I feel like people get into it and they're so excited, and we can just stop a sale or make a couple of phone calls and let it go. It's like, no, it's a ton of babysitting, and you're babysitting multiple things.
Yes.
Um, you have a whole kind of, it's like an episode of a show. It's every character has its own duties and they do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So you are pretty much the coordinator of the entire process.
Right. Yeah. And you're the handler.
Mhm.
And so that there's a lot of responsibility that you're taking on when you are working a foreclosure. So let's just go down a little bit of a list, shall we, of what kind of things you're
Yeah.
going to be looking at. So first of all, here in the Phoenix market and other markets similar to Phoenix, you're going to be dealing with, first of all, the time sensitivity. So once the notice has come out that someone is in foreclosure and they've released that publicly, they have 90 days to auction. Done deal. There is no right of redemption. So this is not something that, oops, I went past the 90 days, but they have a way legally to get their property back. It is
Right.
It is final here. There are other states that have that right of redemption. We do not. So, from a liability standpoint, one of the things that you absolutely want to watch out for is if you get somebody under contract that is in foreclosure and you've got 90 days to make sure that you close on that property and assign it out, which is what a wholesaler would be doing, and make sure that you find a buyer, you've got to have that done before that auction date happens.
And 3 months is not that long. People swear that we've got enough time. No, it's not. But the way the banks work and the way that the seller might work, it is not that long of a time.
No, it's not. And so let's dive into that, right? So if you are marketing to foreclosures, you're going to be marketing to them the minute that you find out that they're in foreclosure. That doesn't mean they're going to get back to you right away. I'd say there's a really small percentage of sellers who knew ahead of time that they were in trouble, and that this is where they were headed. And that small percentage of sellers will immediately reach out to someone to fix the problem before it gets out of control.
Yeah.
That's like this many people, right? And I guarantee you, they're already talking to people before you're reaching out to them. So, they are considering options, and perhaps they'll choose you, perhaps they won't, because they are already doing their own due diligence about what's going to work out best for them. Now, the vast majority of the rest of the sellers are likely to bury their head in the sand. They're afraid, and they don't quite understand everything that's going on. The bank, if they're talking to the bank at all, the bank is either giving them no information or misinformation. That's pretty typical. It's not the bank's job, actually, to tell people when they call and ask about what's going on, to counsel them on what they can do to get out of the situation. Because if you think about it contractually, the bank is on this side, the seller is on this side, or should I say the borrower at this point.
Yeah.
And this party, the borrower, has breached a contract. Why would they, on the other side of it, go, yeah, you breached our contract, so we're going to counsel you through it and give you your best options? They won't, and they do not. Legally, neither are they required to do so, or is it in their best interest?
And the fact that, and I think this is where it gets really overwhelming for the seller, and they start to kind of procrastinate and not do anything because it's not super complicated, but it's daunting. Like, you don't want to do it, and they drag their feet, and you're telling them to do things and they're still not doing it. Yeah. And when the bank sees that you're not a motivated person trying to get this, handled, they will start to also, well, they didn't answer on time. We gave them this date. They didn't say that, so it's all of that plays into the term or the timeline that you're working with.
Yes. And you bring up a great point. If the person is in contact with the bank and the bank is telling them certain things that they expect for them to do, because maybe the bank has said, well, if you're in foreclosure because you can't afford your payment, we can offer you a loan modification. Here are the things that you need to do. If they then get paralyzed due to fear and they don't do those things, and they actually don't follow up when the bank told them to, the bank is going to earmark their account, and the bank is keeping track at this point. So looking at it going, okay, what's the likelihood that these people are going to get back on track? Because the bank does not want to manage people who go into default over and over again. That's a problem from the standpoint of the bank. They only want to deal with people who make their payments on time every month religiously.
Yeah.
So once you get to a point where they realize that this is problematic, and then they're giving you further deadlines that maybe you're blowing past, now it's not in the bank's interest to really help you any further.
Yeah.
Because they realize that this is potentially going to be an ongoing issue that they'll have to manage, and that is not what they want.
Yeah, no.
So, and this happens all the time, because when people get afraid, and they don't know what to expect, and they don't really know what the rules and regulations are, and they're afraid to ask because they're afraid to hear something that's really, really scary, or that's even maybe more time sensitive than what they think, or whatever the case. They don't want to ask questions. They don't want more information. They want to ignore what's happening.
Yeah, and I can speak to that because of so when I had my short sale, I totally buried my head in this, it just, I did not want to deal with it. And it would take me days for me to respond to the bank, weeks, because I didn't really know what I was doing, or what. It was just, it's a very intimidating kind of,
Yes,
just a really gross feeling, because you feel so helpless, and you feel kind of dumb and stupid, because you're like, myself as an adult, I can't figure this out, and I can't make it better. Well, no, you can't, but that's why you have other people trying to help you. You have to do what those folks are telling you to do so that you can get out of that situation.
Yeah. And basically, we get it. Like, that's unfair, because here's the thing. The bank is treating the borrowers, they're talking to them as though they fully understand the bank's function. They're talking to you like you're a bank employee. And you're going, I don't know what this means, and I don't know what that means. And they're certainly not willing to hold your hand through it and explain it to you. So a lot of people get overwhelmed by that process, understandably so, right? Yeah. Because you don't work at the bank, and you don't know what in the world they're talking about, and you're trying to grapple with that information and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So imagine that you are a wholesaler now in the middle of this, with somebody else's property and somebody else's financial issues. And because you don't yet have a contract, which means you don't have legal interest in the property, all you can do is what the seller or the borrower is telling you. You don't have direct access to the bank and information to understand what's happening. So you're in a position now where you're getting information, secondhand. It may or may not be accurate, and it also may or may not be colored by whatever emotional state your seller is in. So if you don't have a lot of expertise because you're new, you won't really know how to interpret a lot of that information. Once you've worked a certain number of these, you start to learn how people talk about things. And when they tell you something, you can tell whether or not they've actually had a conversation with the bank. You can tell the information they're giving you is accurate, or if they're just making something you feel on the spot, right? Yeah. You don't know that when you're new. You need somebody with experience to teach that. So, this is one of the issues that you're going to run into, because part of dealing with foreclosures, as a real estate investor and as a wholesaler, if you're buying directly from that seller, you got to know your stuff, because the seller doesn't, and you have to help walk them through certain things in order for them to be able to either get the information, even something as simple as getting what's called a payoff statement, so that you know exactly what you have to pay the bank, so that when you close on the property, you know how much money the bank is actually supposed to get. Mm-hmm. Even that can be, you'd think it's an easy one phone call thing. Once you're in foreclosure, it's not an easy one phone call thing.
No, it takes days,
Yeah.
weeks sometimes.
Yes.
And just a word of advice, just because they gave you that payoff, by the time you close on your transaction, that payoff may not be good anymore.
Yeah.
You have to pay attention to, like, so how long is this payoff good for? And I mean, there's so many little things, and nobody thinks about it. When you're new, you just you're going through the motions. That's why if at all at any point you're questioning something, obviously ask. Don't try to figure it out yourself.
Right. And don't just take your seller's word for everything, because there's pieces that they still don't know. So for example, a new wholesaler could make the mistake of just asking the seller, well, how much do you owe on your mortgage? So they go, oh, well, I don't know, whatever. I owe about $100,000 left on my mortgage. And then the wholesaler chooses to do their numbers based on that. Well,
Yeah.
the thing, what they owe on their mortgage is not necessarily the same as what they're going to owe after they've already gone into default. There are late fees, there are attorney fees, there are any number of potential liens against them. We've talked about that before. So, and the seller is when you say to them, what's left on my mortgage, they're going to say what's left on their mortgage. And they may not know. They may not have any idea that, oh, guess what? That's what you owe on your mortgage, but it's actually $5,000 more because now you're 2 months into default, and these are all of the fees that have built up over that time. And then if it's another 30 days to close, tack on some more fees on top of that. If a new wholesaler doesn't know that, then they're going to be doing their numbers wrong.
Yeah.
So those are some things to look out for in the beginning. Another issue that we've seen happen is that new wholesalers, so like we said before, they think that 90 days is a lot of time. So say you're talking to a seller fairly early on in the process and they're interested in what you have to say, right? Well, so you still have to go through the entire process of getting them under contract. You still have to run title work, and you have to understand what's happening with the title of that property, and if there's anything that needs to be cleared. Now, if something needs to be cleared from title before you can close, that's additional time, right?
Yeah.
Different things may take different amounts of time based on what that title issue could be. Because there could be, like, Angie, am I right? There could be like a million different things.
I mean, it could be anywhere from, again, so when they do the title report, even if it's a common name, now title and their underwriting team has to go sift through social security numbers and those particular, if it's Benjamin Johnson or Robert Smith,
Right.
Those are so common known names. They can have a myriad of things attached to them, so they have to go through every single thing to see and make sure that it isn't this person that has something attached to him or her or the property. There's been times where the title reports where I've asked for them and it's like a week later and I'm thinking, where's the title report? So, but it's because they have to go through some research and go through that. So it's not only, and then asking for payoffs as well. Title is different. They have a whole process that they follow as well. If you're getting the payoff, you're trying to figure out your own process, but title, that's their job too, to do that. Because you're trying to hit them, the bank from different angles so that you can get things done. But everybody has their own timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. So now you're talking potentially weeks, right? Where you may be dealing with clearing some title issues before you can actually close on that property. Yep. So if you've got 90 days, that's 12 weeks. So it's how many weeks did it get for you to get in touch with the seller? How many weeks did it take for the seller to then agree that they would like to work with you? When did you get that property under contract in the span of your 90-day period? So that many weeks has gone by. Now you're in the middle of escrow, you're clearing title, something comes up that needs to be dealt with before you can close. You don't know potentially how long that's going to take. that can add another couple of weeks, as Angie was saying. God forbid if something really complicated comes up, like it was deeded wrong, and you're just finding out about this right now after you got it under contract, and other people who were on the deed need to now sign waivers and things
Yeah.
in order to clear the title, and you have to go find each of those individual people. So you got to track them down. You have to explain to them what's going on. You have to get them to agree, and then they have to sign a waiver.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine how many weeks, and Angie and I have both been through this process. This is why we say it like this. Imagine how many weeks that can take, because people will be resistant for all kinds of reasons. Well, you're still making money off of the house because now you're going to have to give me money if you want me to sign something. Or I have nothing to do with that property. I have nothing to do with that family, and I'm not signing anything.
I know. Those are the worst. They don't want to help at all.
Exactly.
Ugh.
And so if you run into something like that, that is eating into your timeline. Every single little thing is eating into your timeline. And now if you're wholesaling the property, again, you have to have a buyer on the back end that's ready to go. And so now what are your buyer's expectations? Because first of all, there is no buyer that's going to close on a property without having a clear title. So you can't usurp the whole title process, right?
Right. Your buyer has to perform. They have to perform. So you have to make sure that that buyer is actually going to close on that property.
Yes. That's another issue, right? Now, if you have a buyer that's wishy-washy or that's squirrely about something, and you don't know if they're actually going to close on that property, our policy is that we would not wholesale anything that we won't close on ourselves.
Yeah.
We don't want the liability of having a property under contract and then having to come back and say, we can't move the property. Because if that person happens to be litigious, they might come back and say, you gave me a legal contract saying that this is what you were going to do. So I want to explore my legal options now.
Yeah.
Granted that someone isn't going to go that route, and you cannot ever guarantee that. You just can't. So
that's scary. That's always been my biggest fear. So somebody
is totally scary.
Yeah.
And how many times, Angie, have we come across a legitimate, complex situation that may have, really seriously clouded title so badly that we may not have been able to solve it, and how angry those sellers have gotten when they found out, and to no fault of our own, right? I mean, if, for example, an inherited property, and like we talked about improper deeding a moment ago, there's no way that someone who inherits a property could have known that the family members who had it before did a bunch of silly things with the deeding and messed it up, and that wasn't done legally or done right. We couldn't have known that either without running a full title review.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you find information like that out in the middle of a transaction, people get angry. And then when they get angry, they don't want to be cooperative anymore.
Right. Because there is still a way to figure out. There's always a solution to a problem. And sometimes a solution to a problem may be letting a property go too.
Maybe.
So, so that does happen. It happens rarely, but it does. I mean, it's happened to me, but it was the same thing with somebody. Let's say they don't know the language, or they're not really privy to really reading contracts, or, they just buy a property because they had the cash.
Yeah.
They did a quit claim, not knowing that there's 4 other people on that quit claim, before them, and that some of these people have like $200,000 federal liens against the property or them. So there's a lot of little things that you can run into once that report comes back, and then what? So all of that cuts into your time and trying to figure out what kind of a solution are you going to provide then.
Absolutely. And this is a thing. Now, these issues can happen on any property, but the difference between a property that's in foreclosure and any other property. So say you found a vacant property that has all of these problems, you have plenty of time. So 1, nobody's living in it. And 2, If it's not currently in foreclosure, you can take all the time that you need, so long as it's okay with the seller, to work out all these things so that the property can be sold, right? That's not the case when you have a property in foreclosure. You don't get to call the bank or the trustee and say, well, we're having title issues. And they'll go, oh, sure, we'll go ahead and postpone just because of that. You can attempt to make that argument to them for sure. It doesn't mean that they're going to accept it, because the thing is, if they foreclose, the title issues get wiped out for them. That's the law. So they are not trying to do you a favor. They want to get their debt settled. If they're looking at it from the standpoint of, do you have the capability of clearing the title so that you can get the debt settled, and they think that maybe you don't, why would they work with you? Because their objective is get the debt settled.
I know. And very few will work with you. I mean, sometimes you have to kind of plead.
Yeah.
And state your case. And if you've shown that you're keeping them up to date, you're telling them exactly what things are happening, the extensions that you might need, they're a little bit more lenient, or they'll work with you. But if you just expect to call somebody and ask for some sort of a postponement, no, they're not going to do it. Not same day, same on a phone call, never.
Right. And if you're new, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't have experience talking to trustees, and they don't know who you are, you don't have a relationship with them, all of these things, they're all strikes against you.
Yeah.
And this is something I think a lot of new wholesalers don't fully understand.
Right.
Unfortunately, what we've been told is the process is so simple. You get the property under contract and you sell the contract to somebody else for a fee.
Mm-hmm.
And in theory, it's that simple. Typically in practice, it is not. It's much more complex than that, because you're almost never dealing with super clean, easy properties, super easy transactions that don't have any issues. And again, like we said at the beginning, the more motivated the sellers are, typically the more distress is related to that motivation. So you have to solve those problems. And the thing that I see frequently is that new wholesalers don't have enough experience, not only to solve the number of problems that are likely to come up on a foreclosure property, but the complexity and the type of problems, because it takes some experience doing multiple transactions to understand all those moving parts.
Yeah.
And then understand how it is that you need to problem solve each thing and in what order so you can get to the next thing. And that's quite a bit to juggle. So, if you're new and starting out and you're trying to take this on your own without a mentor that knows how all of these things work, you're likely to get yourself in some hot water. And do you know how to protect yourself from that from multiple angles? So first of all, do you know what your contract should say so that you can exit the contract legally at any point without your seller being able to come back and sue you? Because your contract has to state, reasons that you can exit in order to hold up in court. So just because you initiated the contract, I've actually seen this conversation on a number of Facebook groups where wholesaling is the topic. I have seen not only people assume because they're new and they said, oh, well, I found this contract. I just Googled and I found this contract. And so I went ahead and used it, but because I initiated the contract, I can just cancel it, right? And people will tell them, oh yeah, since it's your contract, you can do whatever you want.
No.
Not true.
No, it has to be a mutual cancellation. So you have to that's a whole, you have to write up an addendum and do the whole thing. And because you don't know, what if the seller's like, no, you said this. So perform.
Right? A contract is legally binding on both ends. So once you've entered into a contract, you have to uphold your end and they have to uphold their end. And if someone isn't doing something to keep this balance, that is when the court gets involved and they get to assess the information and say whether or not that person was allowed to do the action where they essentially breached a contract. So just because you initiated the contract, it doesn't mean you can walk away from it and say it's now null. You have to have reasons written into your contract that give you the opportunity to do that. And those reasons should be either really ironclad, covering a lot of things, or vague enough that it's up to interpretation that it wouldn't really make sense to go to court over, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways for you to write up the contract, and I think that's a whole other episode talk about contracts. But yeah, just because you own it's your contract doesn't mean anything.
No, it doesn't. So I see that misconception happening a lot. I also see people frequently who are like, "Oh, I'm gonna be a wholesaler, so should I just quit claim properties?" Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Never. There are almost zero circumstances where that is appropriate. Now we've seen a couple of people with a lot of experience who came up on a really, really weird deal with a lot of really weird moving pieces that have chosen to do that because between their experience and the due diligence they did, they figured that it was safe enough for them to do. And it's extremely rare. It's not what quitclaim deeds were meant for. So, you don't want to come into this business thinking that because wholesaling is supposed to be a simple process, that also means that it's a fly by the seat of your pants, do it any way you want, without any regard to the laws in the state, or how the distribution and transactional property happens. You can't take it quite that lightly.
No, it's a house. It's somebody's place to, it's a roof, it has walls. Somebody lives there, their livelihood.
Yes.
Yeah, it is surprised me the way people go around willy-nilly quit claiming things. And when they do it illegally too, that's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, there's a lot of things here that can be happening. And again, if you've got a property in foreclosure, you are not allowed legally to quit claim a property that's in foreclosure.
Yeah.
You can't do that. The bank considers that fraudulent activity potentially, because you could be making it look like, so if somebody is quit claiming something, so say my house is in foreclosure and I'm like, oh, well, I don't want the legal ramifications of that. I'm going to quit claim my house to Angie. And then it'll all go away because it'll suddenly be Angie's property. That is not how foreclosures work.
No. No.
Place a legally binding financial contract that money is owed to the bank. Quit claiming the property and suddenly making it someone else's property, that doesn't solve the foreclosure problem, and the bank will come after you for doing so. Even if you have the intention of paying off the mortgage, that's a big old red flag to the bank. You can't quit claim something that is in the
middle of a foreclosure. I know, and I think people try to, because they think they're helping. I think a lot of the times they feel like they're more assisting and they're helping, when in reality, no, it's illegal to do that.
Right. And so this goes right back to what we were saying in the beginning, right? You don't know what you don't know when you're brand new. Mm-hmm. So you might have an idea that this particular thing is going to be helpful and it's going to be fast because we need to beat the clock. You might accidentally be doing something illegal because you don't know what you don't know. And if that's the case, now your signature is on some things too, and you're wrapped up in the middle of it and you have liability.
Yes.
And this is not good for business.
No. And this is where that attorney comes in that I talked about.
Yes. So. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So another liability, again, is, that we touched on a minute ago, was this idea of having your buyer at the end, right? What if you can't close on a property? So this is another aspect of where are my words, you guys? The protection you have for yourself and your business, right? So you want your contracts to be right on the front end. That's one thing that's going to protect you. And the thing is, that's also going to protect your seller, right? So your contracts need to be right. But then the next thing is, if you're wholesaling the property, you need to have a buyer that's lined up, and you need to make sure that you and that buyer are in agreement, right, on what are the terms that are happening here. Because it's not just about finding a buyer and selling it to them. The buyer is going to want certain terms agreed to. So like the buyer might say, I want the seller moved out before I take possession of the property. And if you're trying to close before auction and the buyer is saying, well, I'm not going to close until I have proof that they're out of there. And then the seller, on the other hand, saying, where am I supposed to go until I get the money from the sale of the property? I can't move out. Can you solve that problem? Because that's going to be a problem to solve. You're either going to have to get your buyer to renegotiate their terms and give you some time to help the seller get out. Or we've definitely had situations where we've given sellers a couple $1,000s before closing so that they could move out, so that the property is vacant, so that we can close with our seller. And
yeah.
But you have to have funds available if you're going to do it that way, right? If you're a brand new wholesaler and you're doing this for fast money, and you don't have $2,500 to give the seller to go put down on an apartment so that they can get out in time, how do you solve that problem? So those are, you have to be able to think through all of these things so that everything can be lined up appropriately. Because if you get a property under contract and you can't move it, and you just walk away and you don't close on it, you've just left yourself open to a potential legal shit show. And how many people, Angie, have we talked to that that's happened to, where they've actually had a contract signed and somebody just pieced out because they didn't know what to do?
Somebody left because it was too hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of people, or they end up, because I know that, the seller chooses the person that they want to work with. And some people maybe do have the best of intentions. But if it gets too complicated, I get it, where a new seller would just get scared and not come back. Or maybe they did try everything in their power to figure it out, and the seller wasn't really helping, assisting either, because that happens.
Oh, yeah.
It's not necessarily the wholesaler too, but that's where they call out of desperation, because you might have already spoken to them. And that is why there's a lot to say about knowing what you're talking about when you're at the door or on the phone, or even in your collateral material, your letters, because they want to make sure that they do have somebody that knows what they're talking about, and that they're going to be able to carry out the entire process, and not be left hanging before foreclosure date.
Right. And if that's the case, and because someone is inexperienced, they just walk away. So a lot of people think that your contract, that the expiration date, once that contract hits the expiration date, that means it's just all over. But depending on how the wholesaler did that contract, if they went down, for example, and recorded a memorandum that they have property under contract, and then they were like, oh, I can't do anything with it, because this is another thing that happens. New wholesalers hear about things like, oh, I'm supposed to file a memorandum. They don't really know what it means. They'll go do that, and then they'll go, well, I can't finish this transaction because I don't understand how to do these things, and they walk away. Now they have a memorandum that's clearing title, that's clouding somebody else, and they're like, I don't want to deal with this property. Now, if somebody comes in behind them and goes, I know how to fix this problem, they've got an additional problem to deal with, because they got to go find that wholesaler and get that contract cleared out.
Yeah. And they may make you figure out how to do the recording, to undo the memorandum, to
Exactly.
Yeah, it gets really messy.
Exactly.
Well,
so, imagine you're a new wholesaler that came after the other new wholesaler that did all of these things, and you don't know how to solve all these problems. And this is why sellers get upset and frustrated when they're dealing with someone who gives them at the very beginning all of these promises that they're going to be able to do all of this and it's going to be super easy, and then they walk away, and they find themselves in a situation where they've talked to 2, 3, 4 investors. And by the time they get to the people who are coming in, at the bitter end of it, who are can solve almost any problem, they don't believe us.
Yeah. No, because they don't trust anybody anymore.
Exactly. And oftentimes it is not that the problems that they had were unsolvable. More frequently, it is that the problems that they had required some work, and it was a little complicated. And wholesalers, by sort of definition, don't necessarily want to put a lot of time and effort into something. They want quick.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them, in my opinion, unethically, will just walk away when something is difficult. And that causes extra distress for the seller. And then that causes the people who are coming in trying to do the right thing later to have to really scramble. Because if somebody is calling us, and we have this happen all the time, it's 3 days before the auction. And they go, well, I worked with 4 other people and nobody else could fix my problem, and I'm desperate. Can you fix this? And when we figure out what it is, 9 to 10 it's fixable, but now do we have time to do it?
No. And now the trustee's pissed off, the bank's pissed off, everybody's angry. So yeah, and it does happen, guys. And I feel like, again, if you're out there and somebody's struggling, just reach out. There's there's a few people there's a lot of people that they know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're happy to help. Or just like, again, like we've said, just have that person in your pocket that that you can go and ask questions to, and walk you through your first deal.
Yeah.
Really, really important for somebody to just kind of back you up, so that you don't make these horrible mistakes, or if you're dealing with something, just a deal that's so hard or extremely time consuming. There's a lot to it. Sometimes making a $14,000 on a wholesale deal is not, you wonder if it was worth it. It absolutely it was, but did that whole 2 months,
right,
was it worth it? So
yeah. And so because of all of those complexities, and because of the time sensitivity of foreclosures, my opinion is that if you're a brand new wholesaler, I think that you should do a few deals working on something that doesn't have the time component attached to it, right? Because learning all of these intricacies about how to clear title and all of those things and all those difficulties, that is important, and it's really good foundational information. But trying to learn it on the fly, if you don't have someone that you can go to that can give you answers like this and work side by side with you, is going to be a problem. So my suggestion is, if you're brand new, you should be looking at vacant properties. You should be looking at driving for dollars, which is, essentially driving around and looking for things like a city violation in the yard. Or maybe you can determine, in certain neighborhoods, you can determine that a property is vacant. Based on what the yard looks like. Is it boarded up? Is the water clear, turned off because everybody else's yard is green, but this one, things like that. So there's a lot of information out there that you can utilize to, do driving for dollars. There's lists that you can get of vacant properties, and you can work those. And there's other kinds of distress. City violations are a really popular one because those take a really long time to actually foreclose. The city can foreclose, but they take forever because, like, the city takes forever to do everything, right? So,
yeah.
So you've got some time built in there to work that type of a lead. If you're honest with your seller and you say, look, there are some complicated issues here. I'm going to need your help because I'm going to need information from you to work these out. But this, I will continue to work on it and we'll get it done. They're likely to be happy that someone is helping them solve the problems that they don't know how to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And or referrals. Like, if you're just kind of getting out there and you tell family and friends, like, this is kind of what you want to do, and somebody knows somebody that is trying to sell a property or has a property, I think that's the best kind of what should I say? I'm losing my words. It's the best lead, one of the best leads, because it's easy. And you don't have to stress about it, or you just know that it came from somebody and it's somebody that you might know.
Right.
And there's not this impending doom.
Yeah. Yeah. And that gives the opportunity too for the people that I mean, you may know somebody who knows somebody who has like a property that's been like maybe a rental for a really long time and it's in really bad disrepair, and they don't want to put a bunch of money into it to fix it up. They just want to collect the equity out of it. But maybe it's not something that would sell well traditionally because of the shape that it's in.
Yeah.
Those are great leads, for new people.
Absolutely.
Because again, you can take your time. The thing about foreclosure is that it's not just the seller that's under pressure in a foreclosure situation. You as the wholesaler or the investor working the transaction, you're under that pressure too, because the minute that you've got a signed contract, you have a legal responsibility to do the things that you said you would do to get that property closed on. However you do that, whether you close on it yourself or whether you assign it to a buyer. So to me, that's a lot of responsibility for somebody brand new to take on. And I feel like the reason that brand new people take it on so frequently is just because they've kind of been fed a lot of hype and they don't really know what they're in for.
No. And to be honest, like they get a lot of foreclosure leads get a lot of play.
Oh yeah, tons.
Everybody's out for who's pre-foreclosure, foreclosure, short sale, like all of that. It's just, they get a lot of play. But there's other leads out there that I would rather much prefer do. So foreclosures I'll do them, and it's always a challenge, but it's always fun to be able to accomplish them and get through a solution and a win-win for everybody. But I have to tell you that it's always stressful. Even the easy ones are still stressful.
Yeah. The entities involved make it stressful. The time constraints make it stressful. It's kind of an inherent part of it. So that's also something else I think that's really valuable to think about when you're new and you're coming into this, making an assessment, right? And going, well, what kind of leads do I want to work? Because I think that there are people who don't know any better and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to work foreclosures because they're motivated. Okay. And they don't really know what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start getting into the middle of it and it's like, well, this is a mess. Why would I ever want to do this?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, we've known some people that have done maybe one or two and they're like, yeah, that's not for me.
Right. I'm done.
Same with door knocking. Like they went out once or twice and yeah, that's not for me. I get it. Like you just have to find your niche, but it is a good way to start.
It is. And there are sort of what I like to call micro steps that you can take as a new person too. If you're new coming in, but maybe your strong point, like if you're able to network with people who have capital and they're interested in getting properties and they're looking for a wholesaler to help them out, you can work with other wholesalers who don't have a big buyers list. Now, I don't typically like what we call daisy chaining, which is having more than one middleman between the seller and the buyer, but sometimes it's also necessary. Sometimes depending on the property, it might be the type of property that it is. It's harder to find a buyer for whoever got it under contract. Mm-hmm. But it also could just be, maybe they don't have a big enough buyers list yet. And they need some help, moving that property along. If everyone is fair in terms of what they'll accept price-wise, that's doable. So if you're the wholesaler with the contract and you understand that you can't move it and you need to find someone who can, if you're willing to take a little bit out of your own fee to make sure that they can still have a decent fee and that there's still room for whoever is going to be the end buyer for it, that strategy can work just fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it builds on your reputation too. Mm-hmm. You'll be known for being fair and give it, and you work with your ethical and your integrity.
Absolutely. And that's a really important point, because don't assume that because you're new and maybe you don't know people in the investing community just yet, don't assume that you can quietly walk away from a deal and nobody will know what happened. Because here's the thing, when sellers feel like they got screwed over, they're mad about it. And they're going to tell other people. And not only are they going to tell their circle, but the next investor that comes in and says, I can fix this problem, they're going to go, well, I was under contract with so-and-so. And I guarantee you that investor's going to go, do you have that contract? Do you know what their LLC name was?
Yeah.
Right? We do. We want to know who's doing what, in the community. We want to understand, because, for several reasons. One, because, we want to know if there's people that we shouldn't be working with.
Yeah.
But
yeah, because I mean, there's times where we've ended up calling the person that was before us, the wholesaler before us, to see like what happened, like what's going on, or maybe they know something that we need to know too. So
right,
just but you gotta be careful, because people talk.
People do. And if you've got a reputation for walking away from deals that are fixable deals, that's and you're walking away because you don't know what to do, that's going to get around, because they're going to sell that property to someone.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, you should hope that they do end up selling that property to someone, because if it gets all the way to the end of the line and they get foreclosed on because you couldn't move the property, that's a huge liability. That is something that I would consider that a complete catastrophe, and I would never ever want that to happen.
Yeah.
One, because ethically speaking, right, you've created a relationship with the seller and you've told them that you can do something to help.
Yes.
They should not lose their home because of you. If they were going to bury their head in the sand and lose it anyway, that has to be on them, and they can't have someone coming in going, I'll fix it all, and then fail to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So ethically it's not right. And then legally speaking, again, you're putting yourself in harm's way. And the last thing that you want to start your real estate career with is a lawsuit.
Yeah, exactly. It's scary. It is really scary.
Yeah. So
yeah, well, I mean, we both had our we didn't go through everything, but having to get an attorney for a certain transaction was, I mean, it's scary.
Yeah, it really is. And when people get upset, you don't know what they're capable of.
Right.
It is what it is. Like this, there's no way of getting out of the emotional part of this process for people.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like for the investors, we're looking at it from a very different standpoint. And I've heard investors complain about the fact that, sellers are so difficult to deal with. And part of that is because they're so emotional about what's going on, but it's the nature of it. You can't get away from it. So you have to understand that going in, and then you have to prepare yourself for that.
It is it is scary to talk about because it is, I mean, I had a brush with it, and I'm thinking, once you have that happen though, I feel like you are very much aware of everything that you need to have in place so that does not happen again.
Yeah.
Because it's not a fun place to be at.
No, it's really not.
Even when you know that you're within your right. Now, if you actually, like Lisa said, if you screwed up something because of the way you wrote your contract, now it's even worse. So, yeah, it's just, again, best bet is to consult with somebody.
Yeah. So
an expert, not just anybody.
Yes, for sure, an expert. Yeah, not only, I'm glad you clarified that, not only someone with a lot of experience, but also someone who has the appropriate resources, or maybe you go directly to that resource. Maybe you're talking to a real estate attorney not just to a mentor that you know has dealt with their real estate attorney or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I know that, like we said in the beginning, I know that this topic is fairly controversial, you know, and that this can be an unpopular opinion, but I believe that it has a lot of validity. You know, I think that if you're going to be effective at this business and you're going to find success, then there's a certain amount of learning that needs to be done on the front end. And to me, jumping directly into the hardest, most complicated lead source is potentially setting yourself up for failure, and also, you know, also setting up your seller for a bad experience.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anybody out. So doing a few deals with other lead sources first, even if it takes a bit longer, and even if there's not as much motivation as there would be otherwise, I think in the long run makes a lot more sense for anybody who wants to do this with longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense.
And if you are insistent that foreclosures are what you want to come into, even if you're brand new, then I think the strategy there is to have a mentor that has worked a lot of foreclosures and understands how they work. Like Angie said, you know, set aside some business funds so that you can have a real estate attorney, and you can talk to them about contracts, and you can talk to them about what the process is to make sure that everything is done correctly from the beginning. And then, you know, then you have someone also to check in with if things get complicated. And,
Yeah.
you know, you've already created that relationship, or, you know, paid them for a few hours of their time so that they can make sure, you know, that they're answering your calls when you're calling, you know, and covering your questions.
Absolutely covering your questions. Yeah. I just think the whole, I get it. If again, because they do get a lot of hype and they get a lot of play, foreclosures, it is just a very interesting animal to deal with. And not every bank is the same. They're all different. The trustees are different. Like we said, it's a new play every single time.
Mm-hmm.
So just be conscious of that. If you are adamant of just doing foreclosures,
yeah,
it's a lot of work, and it's stressful.
It is. It is. So, like everything else, there's a right way to approach this stuff. Educate yourself and make sure that you've lined up the appropriate resources beforehand. And if you do those things, you know, then absolutely learning as you go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the best way is to learn hands-on for this business. You can't learn. It's not only book or videos, but you have to actually get out there and do it.
Right.
The only way.
Yeah. Which is, I think, why it's important to, you know, get a couple of less complicated deals under your belt and experience the whole thing start to finish. It'll give you a much better perspective on what it is that the transactions look like, and everything that you have to juggle, and all the things that you need to know before you take on something quite a bit more complicated with it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I wish I would have done that, maybe. That would have been a little bit, maybe I wouldn't have been so stressed from the beginning, but.
Yeah, we definitely, trial by fire was certainly the way that we entered into the game.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like never having done a deal and, you know, walking up to knock your first door and have someone immediately chew you out for having the audacity to speak to them about their personal financial situation. That happened to me. Very first door I ever knocked.
Aw, God, you know, I was so lucky. I mean, it was just so easy. Like, not, I guess because I spoke the language, so it made them feel comfortable, like they could have finally talked to somebody that could help. But I've had mine, you know, where if I don't leave, they're gonna kick my ass, kind of thing, and all that, or let the dogs out, or all that other stuff.
Yeah.
All right, sure.
Another fun aspect of it that we haven't even gotten to yet. So
yeah,
there's some good information there for another episode.
Yeah, definitely. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to catch this on the replay if you weren't able to see the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't think there were any comments, right, from what I saw.
I don't have any comments up on the screen. If I have missed anything because I still don't know what the hell I'm doing, you all can blast me in the comments for that after the fact. I do promise I will come back in and answer.
Yes, an answer. Yep, that'll be it'll be fine. I don't know. I thought I saw something, but maybe I did. Who knows? I know Facebook's a little funny, so it's all good. We'll get to it.
Yeah, so it's telling me, it is telling me, confirming that comments are on, and I don't.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, so y'all could blame Facebook if that got messed up. Sorry.
Yeah. Right.
But thank you guys so much for being with us. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Stay safe.
Yes, stay safe. You know, hopefully everybody has a nice, relaxing weekend, and we will be back on Monday with some new content for you.
Yes. Get home by 8.
Curfew. Stick to curfew.
Curfew. Yes.
All right, everybody.
All right. Bye, guys.